So, I'm going to be presenting on the topic of sustainable development during the infodemic. How does misinformation and information uncertainty impact our ability as an industry, and I would say society, to pursue sustainable development? With how much misinformation is out there and also the industry's response so far, I think that this topic is very important as we explore how we can start to course correct to actually pursue sustainable development. Now, I'm starting to give away some of the topics of my presentation, so I'll stop there and really begin with defining each of the words in my title, Sustainable Development During the Infodemic. Starting with sustainability and taking kind of a historical perspective to where we are today. So I don't think we really actually got started with sustainability in 1987, but I do think that this is when it was starting to be more widely in the public zeitgeist. And so this was via our Common Future or the Brundtland Commission, as I'm sure this is something that you are at this point familiar with, where something is sustainable only if it meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations to meet their own needs. In 1992, the UN conference in Stockholm and on environment development in Rio de Janeiro happened, where human activities were first specifically linked to the irreversible impacts that we're seeing on Earth. In 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was signed, and we all know where that ended up. Fast forward to 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement happened, where globally it was agreed upon that in order to limit the impacts of climate change, we have to limit global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. In 2015, that same year, the Millennium Development Goals shifted to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll talk about a bit more in the next slide after this, but really highlighting how society is intrinsically linked with sustainability, as well as the economy and the environment. In 2019 and 2021, the IPBES and IPCC reports were republished. Now, these aren't new, they've been around for decades. These are just the latest iterations. Ultimately, they look at the IPBES biodiversity impacts and IPCC climate change impacts that we're seeing around the world, the current global scientific consensus. They're big reports, and if you want more information, they are freely available, so you can go learn more if you just go and Google these reports. So, as mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN, these highlight the systemic process or aspect of sustainability and how the economy and society are linked within sustainability as well as the environment. This is a Venn diagram that I'm sure you are familiar with. Kind of an older perspective of sustainability where there are 3 legs on a stool that are of equal importance here: the economy, society, and environment. And when they are equally valued, then that's where you'll see sustainability. Now, that shifted to the nested theory of sustainability to highlight the order of importance, because without soil to grow crops, so without the environment, there would be no society. And without the society to fuel the economy, there would be no economy. So highlighting the order of importance in how we pursue sustainability, like you have to take care of the house first, and then the people, and then their money, kind of thing. And 2 more modern frameworks. Here I'll highlight first the natural step framework for sustainability, and specifically I'll highlight the resource funnel. So this was a more science-based, again, systemic outlook for sustainability. There's more to this framework, but within this funnel, it highlights when there are less resources available because we're depleting them. There's more societal demand. Our margins for addressing, for example, climate change or biodiversity loss become smaller and smaller. And only until we can widen that funnel via reducing our demand of resources and increasing the available resources, that's when we start to move towards sustainability and can actually meet the challenges, for example, of climate change. So, something I think really important within this funnel is that sustainability is a moving target. It's not really an endpoint. You're not going to land on it. It can be better defined as a process of directed change because things change. The environment is changing all around us. Our resources are becoming more and more limited, especially today. Maybe that'll change. Hopefully, that'll change. And so, we're not going to land on sustainability because it's always going to change. The other framework that I will highlight is the planetary boundaries framework for sustainability, where it looks at the safe operating space for humans in all these aspects within the graphic on the screen. I highly recommend looking more into both frameworks if you want to better understand where we currently are with how we think about sustainability. And to sustainable development. So, what does that mean? Considering the uncertain future and nebulousness of sustainability, companies who are pursuing sustainable development have to have access to as much relevant information as they can so that they can make the best possible decisions. So, to get this information, they have to measure and record data in terms of their specific goals because you can't be accountable unless you actually account for things. So, ecological accounting, it's a whole field. This is the backbone of sustainable development. Actually measuring what's happening in a product's life cycle, for example. In the context of a product, a cosmetic product, probably the most important tool within ecological accounting for understanding what's happening, understanding a product's impact, is what people call a life cycle assessment, looking at from raw material extraction all the way to manufacturing, transportation, what are the associated emissions from, for example, glass versus plastic packaging for this specific product, to use, and then finally disposal, or maybe it's reintegrated into a life cycle. It's important when you're thinking about life cycles to think about the boundaries within them. Because, for example, if we stop at the product getting on the shelf, then we miss out on the use and disposal phase of the life cycle, which are very important. Or if we start at the manufacturing part, then we miss the raw material extraction. I've seen this a lot in, for example, bio-based plastic, where they don't include, for example, the harvesting situation. With use, also, sometimes if you leave that out, you're going to miss really important things. And so I'm thinking about in 2022, there was a life cycle assessment published on solid toothpaste tablets, something that seems like it would be more eco-friendly, just based off of the assumption. Like it seems like it's right. Well, actually, according to this LCA, compared to a plastic tube of toothpaste, it was more impactful. And the reason why is because the use phase, the consumer use phase, where the consumer had to use more water to actually use the product effectively. And so I think a lot of people aren't aware that consumer use is often a significant contributor to the product life cycle. You can also find a lot of LCAs in the detergent categories. So if you want more on how consumer use impacts the end product impact, I would highly recommend looking more towards that. So life cycle assessments, and then we've got carbon footprinting. I will say that this is kind of debated in the scientific community whether or not this should be prioritized in the way that it is, but there is prioritization that are being led by regulations, especially for larger companies, where now companies have to measure scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so these two tools are ways that we can understand a product's impact. And you will be learning more about these tools in a presentation later on in the day, so stay tuned. And then finally, infodemic, where there is this wave of information washing over society. And this information includes actual information, misinformation, disinformation, and how society, now we have social media that is kind of the cataclysm or earthquake, I guess, that's leading to this tsunami of information washing over society. So people now have access to an enormous amount of information, right and wrong, that they never had access to before, thanks to the interwebs. Much of this was without any kind of expert intermediation. This is new. Prior to the internet, things used to be vetted, and this isn't really the case anymore, as I'm sure you know if you're on, for example, Instagram. So infodemic has been coined as the descriptor for this phenomenon. The issue here is misinformation. The World Economic Forum has placed misinformation as the core technological and geopolitical risk globally. Via social media algorithms, beliefs are reinforced by repetition within a closed system. You can just think about yourself on Instagram or any social media feed, YouTube maybe. I'm familiar with Instagram, where I only see content now that agrees with me, things that I slow down on the feed and actually want to see. And so this is leading to echo chambers, and this is ultimately leading to polarization. So the end result here is that people are becoming more radical, while more moderate voices are hindered because they don't do well in the algorithm, fundamentally damaging democracy and social stability. And now, how does this all relate to sustainability? Polarization threatens cooperation and problem solving and decision making, while misinformation distracts the public and decision makers away from the needed action, potentially wasting resources on actions that are counterproductive and unhelpful. And this is something that we see a lot of in the sustainability policy arena, where we do things that sometimes end up making the problem that the policy is trying to address worse. We have an example in this presentation, so stay tuned. So, to address climate change and biodiversity loss, cooperation and evidence are crucially needed, and polarization and misinformation undermine this. To backstep a little bit, we're still on the topic of misinformation. We can look at greenwashing. So, companies recognize the growing demand for green products. For example, consumers are willing to pay more for products that they perceive to be greener. And also, there's this whole market of impact or ESG investors, where investors want to invest in companies they perceive to be socially or ecologically friendly. And so, in order to meet this demand, unfortunately, many companies have turned to greenwash. This is a quote from the European Commission website suite for Sweep for products making green claims, where they found most were greenwashing. So this was in 2021. And they said that greenwashing misleads the public and does not give due advantage to companies who are pursuing sustainability, ultimately leading to a less green economy. So companies who are making deceptive green claims may be making sustainability harder to actually achieve or strive towards. So now, how does misinformation impact sustainability? We've kind of alluded to some of these things, albeit there's only limited evidence, and so there is a growing research interest in this topic, but it's relatively new. So the first way is with misplaced conservation. This is a graphic from a study published in 2021 by Ford et al. On the topic of misplaced conservation, where it highlights when people are misinformed and when they're polarized, this can lead to, for example, more misinformation, which may lead to things like misallocation of resources because they're doing the wrong things, even if it's with good intentions. There might be delegitimization of evidence, and this might directly or indirectly harm biodiversity. They might end up also doing things that are worse. For example, in the study, they highlighted environmentalists in a certain area wanted to support monarch migration. And so they went and planted milkweed, but they went and planted the wrong milkweed that ended up disrupting the migration pattern and ended up making the monarch issue worse. So that was just one example within the study. Ultimately, outcomes are the arbitrators for sustainability or environmental or conservation success. So while we might feel good for doing something, if it's not actually helping, then what are we doing here? The second way is via something called green nudging. And this is a graph from a study published in 2019 by Hegman et al. Ultimately, green nudging is when there's something that's not really that effective, not well supported by the evidence. And when that comes first, it's a nudge. It feels like it's nudging us in the right way. Okay, so when these nudges come before something that's more evidence driven but harder, then that evidence driven, more likely to be effective policy, when it comes after a green nudge, it's less likely to be effective. Versus if that effective policy comes first before the green nudge, then it's more likely to be effective. All of this is to say that the order of implementation of policy matters. And so, following the best available evidence when we are deciding our sustainability actions or policies is super important, because when people feel like they've done something, this is an unfortunate psychological thing. When people feel that they've contributed, especially when the thing that will be more impactful is harder, they're less likely to contribute to that harder thing. Highlighted in this graph was carbon pricing. So when carbon pricing comes before a nudge, more likely to be effective. And carbon pricing is one of the more evidence-supported strategies for climate change mitigation, versus if it comes after a nudge, less likely to be effective. To the cosmetics context, natural does not equal green. There are many examples to highlight this. For example, many essential oils take hundreds of thousands of plant material to extract a single pound of essential oil. Many are also sourced via wild harvesting, which is widely seen as quite disruptive to the environment. Neither does organic. There's a lot of research to show that agricultural styles that require more land have higher associated greenhouse gas emissions. And further, according to the IPBES 2019 report, agriculture, specifically expansion into intact ecosystems, were the greatest threat for biodiversity loss. This isn't to say that organic is bad. It's just that to think that using an agricultural style that it requires more land, to think that that's going to be the end-all be-all sustainable option, is just not aligned with reality. Or GMO free. And this isn't to say that GMOs are a panacea of they're going to be greener, but sometimes they can help improve efficiency of production of crops or maybe ingredients so that they have less impact, or may have improved nutritional quality, or may have improved performance in the context of many cosmetic ingredients. Or plastic free. So if we stopped using all plastic in favor of eco alternatives, for example, glass, paper, or aluminum packaging, we would need, and this is according to LCAs on the topic, we would need 3.6 times the material, 2.2 times the energy, with an increase of 2.7 times the carbon dioxide emissions. So plastic free equals better? Well, probably not, although there's no silver bullet to sustainable packaging. I think that's really the problem with these blanket statements, is because it simplifies something that's really complicated. Like with packaging, the most sustainable option for a package, it's going to vary greatly depending on the individual formulation and also the individuals who are using the product, and what kind of waste management infrastructure they have available to them, and what kind of, for example, if you're doing a bottle return program, well, that's great, but is it actually viably accessible to your users? Or SLS free. So SLS, compared to many other surfactants, is produced in a continuous process instead of, for example, batches. Many other surfactants are, and they have to be transported to different manufacturing facilities. So the process of production is actually quite environmentally efficient in the context of other surfactants. Also, SLS is biodegradable. So I don't really know why this idea is out in the consumer zeitgeist, but it is. Or waterless. The largest impact for many products are the consumer use phase. So if we're making, for example, oil cleansers that require more water to wash off from the skin, are you actually having a net water reduction? No. Is that actually less impactful? You should probably do an LCA to compare. When you look at formulations and LCAs specific to formulations, the most impactful part is often the emollients. And so if you're removing the water and filling up that space with extra emollient, that's more impactful. Again, are you actually having a net sustainability improvement with your formulation? Or DIY. I've seen this from ingredient suppliers or smaller organic formulating schools. This idea that DIY will be environmentally superior because it empowers consumers. Well, it's great on an educational standpoint, but you just have to think about this through the lens of economies of scale. And it's, quickly obvious that it just doesn't add up. Or solid. So I brought up the toothpaste tablet example as one example. So if these products require more water, it's just a case by case. It's not so obvious that these products will be less impactful. At the end of the day, you just have to actually account for it. Ecological accounting, do an LCA. If you want to make the claim that one product is better than the other, you should probably actually prove it. Or clean, and we don't have to get into that. So a case example to kind of bring some of what I've been talking about home is the Hawaii bans for sunscreens that purportedly harm coral reefs. So these bans are based off of an outlier study by Downs et al., where they used extreme exposures of organic filters, UV filters. They put the coral in an enclosed plastic bag with the high concentrations that are not even remotely relevant to what is in nature. And they found in this exposure scenario that the coral will bleach. It's important to note that other things would also, in this context, cause coral to bleach. For example, like POP, but we're not concerned about POP bans for saving coral. So overwhelmingly, the body of evidence does not suggest that sunscreen filters of any type are contributing to coral bleaching or even are preventing the recovery of bleached coral. So when we're talking about relevant exposures, and you can look to the recent 2022 National Academies of Science literature review on this topic, but rather it's things like rising water temperatures due to climate change. These are the predominant drivers. I think it's also important to add, because zinc oxide based sunscreens are allowed within the Hawaii filter bans and are also approved within many of the reef safe certifications or labels. So under the same unrealistic exposure conditions used to demonstrate that organic filters cause coral bleaching, so does zinc oxide. So my question is this a case of misplaced conservation and green nudging? The elephant in the room here is that consumerism is not sustainable. Per capita, overconsumption is the most environmentally destructive thing we do societally. And despite improvements in eco-efficiency, carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels have increased by 80% since 1970. The overwhelming evidence shows that the negative impacts associated with overconsumption outweigh any of the benefits associated with green innovation. We as a society, we need to slow down consumption. Green consumerism, this idea that you will be able to save the environment by buying green products, this is at odds with sustainable consumption. We need to purchase less, use less, waste less. The former, green consumerism, has the paradoxical trend of increased consumption, and again, consumption is the most environmentally destructive thing we do societally. So the push for green consumerism, this is both from industry when we see all this green marketing, but also from government with the policy that they put forth. This has created an illusion of progress that distracts from the urgent structural changes needed to achieve sustainable development. So this is where I see the cosmetics industry we're all on the BS bandwagon. And I think it really started, at least for some of the sustainability messages and the safety messaging that we see in the industry right now. In the 90s, with the first, for example, free from claims, first SLS, then paraben free. And then consumers saw that and then assumed that those ingredients that the products were free from must be bad. And then, fear works. And so they caught on to that because they want to buy products that are safer for them and for their families. So this reinforced more and more fear marketing, where companies started to increase the free from list to like up to 20, or you can look at Beauty Counter and they make all these claims about having more ingredients that they are removing past the EU list. And there's a whole thing. We can go into a lot more detail on that, but we don't have to. So this is reinforcing consumer expectations until NGOs like the EWG came into play, which then again reinforced more fear marketing, more consumer expectation, until then retailer standards started to change. With, for example, Clean at Sephora. We'll see if that continues after the class action lawsuit that has been put forth. But they have their list that brands have to comply to. So now brands who are entering the market are forced to comply to that, because especially indie brands, they want to be sold at Sephora or comparable retailers. So companies are going to have a hard time succeeding unless they actually meet these standards. So it's incentivizing more fear marketing, incentivizing more consumer expectation, more traction with the EWG, and around we go. We, as the cosmetics industry, have been the tail that has been wagging the dog. Marketing controls the party here. So how do we break this cycle of BS that we're seeing in the cosmetics industry? This is where I see science communication as a path forward. For better or worse, consumers drive the industry. And so when they are misinformed on, for example, what safety looks like, or on what true sustainability progress looks like, as they currently are, good communication to them has to become a priority. It's well demonstrated in the literature that science communication is critical for addressing information gaps and also in combating misinformation. However, also in the literature is that poorly executed science communication can also make the issues of misinformation worse. As an industry, if we want to move forward productively, we need to stand up to the misinformation, and that will come with investment in good science communication, both internally, for example, connecting your marketing department with your science department, and externally. And this can be from the company itself, getting out and doing science communication, and also by supporting science communicators who are already online. And so I see science communicators as the new beauty influencer that industry should be supporting if we want to actually combat the misinformation. Because these science communicators who are already online, they already have the ears of consumers. Many of them are doing science communication on the side of their full-time job. Many of them are doing it for free, and so burnout is a thing. And so if we want them to continue doing this, then supporting them, especially financially, because if they can work less, then science communication can be a viable career for them to really combat misinformation. Michelle Wong is a really great example of how industry has supported a science communicator to the point that she can now do this in the capacity that she currently does it, because she's working less in her day job and more on the science communication than she does online. And for my own example, an example of industry support, this past month in December, I presented at the SCC scientific meeting in California. It was quite financially burdensome to get out there and also work on this presentation as an independent professional. So Clarion sponsored me to go out. To me, this is what support from industry for science communicators can look like. Another example of industry support is via our sponsors for the Sustainable Beauty eSummit today. So a massive thank you to Croda, who is our silver sponsor for this event, and Intelect, who is our bronze sponsor. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be available in the Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, the Q&A starts now.